Page object model. Page object model is idea of mapping model of your test framework to the model of your page. Objective is to design a framework in a way a user will use the web page. A website has a login page. We will create a class called loginpage.cs having the same functionality as login page on the website. Login page class would be responsible for getting elements of the login page, for example, username field, password field, and then it can be manipulated by the code. We will have a login method inside the login page class, and username and password arguments will be passed to it. As login page test will call this. Now there will be another uh, class which will have the test cases. So login page test will call this in the login page test class. This method login method will be called with the arguments of username and password passed to it to this login method, and hence your user can log in. Each web page will have a class which will have methods which represent all the functionality of the page. Method in the class correspond to actions a user can perform on the actual web page. Pages do not have to match to a page but could map to section of UI. For example, header and footer could be modeled as separate pages. Instead of putting all the sections of a page into one page, depending upon the situation, you can create separate pages. For example, header or footer or navigation bar could be a separate page. The main advantage of page object model is that if the UI changes for any page, it doesn't require us to change any tests cases. We just need to change only the code within the page objects. So these page objects are used wherever are placed at a central place, and then they are the different methods are called from the test cases. So you can, if there is any change in the UI, you can just go to this page objects and make those changes. So business logic will be separate and tests will be separate. Also, it is better to model by actual functionality which the user will do and not model to each object of the UI. For example, there is like say a WordPress blog site, and there are search posts, and could be the functionality which will have method for testing. Similarly, moving a blog post to trash action can be put into a single method. So inside the method, you don't match it with each object of the page, but rather the functionality. So it may um, involve several steps. So you can put all those within the same method. Automation framework. Here are some of the advantages of creating an automation framework. First one is to reduce brittleness. So the test should not break, or the test cases should not break easily. For example, if the ID of the element changes, then you have to design your framework in such a way that you can change it easily at one place rather than going into different classes and different pages to change that ID. Also, the test should be the framework should be easily to use. So that's also one of the things you have to take into account when creating a framework. And also it should be easily maintainable. So if there are some updates or some changes required, you can easily perform that action without too much complications. Also, the framework should be scalable, which it means is like if the additional features or additional uh, complexity is added to the website, then your framework design should be such that you can easily accommodate uh, those additional web pages or additional functionalities which are added to the website. And also this automation framework should be reusable. So if you work on one project and then then there's another project which adds some additional functionalities to the web pages or website, then you don't have to start from scratch, but rather use the code which has been written, the framework which has been created, and reuse it. So one of the approach is to create two projects. One is like test framework and other is test. So test framework when can be reused, and any changes in the business logic goes into test framework, and actual test cases go into the test project. So the idea is to separate the two. Tests should not depend on Selenium. We just want the framework to depend upon Selenium WebDriver. So you should organize your test cases, uh, organize different classes within the test framework by creating folders. For example, test cases could go in test scripts. Automation framework should have reusable code. Page object model can have actual pages which are mapped to the actual website, and then BDD, TDD automation scripts can go into a separate folder. So here's like a example of one project for testing. So you have the folders, and then test cases will go into test scripts. Actual pages will go into the page pages folder. Test frameworks. Most popular unit testing frameworks in .NET world are the open source NUnit framework, XUnit, and the commercial MS Test framework. NUnit framework. NUnit contains a test case attribute that allows implementing parameterized tests. This does not exist in MS Test. So these are some of the pros and cons or comparison between advantages disadvantages of the MS Test and NUnit framework. NUnit is much faster compared to MS Test framework. NUnit can run tests in 32-bit and 64-bit. MS Test only runs in 32-bit. NUnit was created solely for the idea of unit testing. MS Test was created for testing, but also can do unit testing. Here are some of the advantages of MS Test. MS Test has much better abilities for integration-based testing. Ability to do data-driven tests from a DB data source. That's also one of the advantages. Ability of MS Test, ability to do performance testing, ability to determine the order of tests, order tests, and ability to easily set up and tear down and generate database data. So here are like a typical example of test cases created with NUnit, and later I'll show MS Test also. So here you see that in NUnit the attributes is test for the method. So before the test method you have to put this test attribute, and similarly before the class you have to put this test fixture, and there are other attributes or annotations also, but these are just a couple of them. Similarly, if you go to MS Test, you'll see that test class is the annotation or attribute or decoration, whatever you want to call, and then that is a test method attribute also. So this is just two shown here, but there are several others which we can cover in some other video. Okay, so There's a third test framework also which is getting very popular. Nowadays, the ASP.NET Core team is using XUnit. XUnit.NET is a free open source community focused unit testing tool for the .NET framework, written by original inventor of NUnit version 2. XUnit.NET is the latest technology for unit testing in C#, VBNet, and other .NET languages. Now let's go back to NUnit. So in order to set up NUnit, install Selenium WebDriver. First you have to install Selenium WebDriver and Selenium support classes from NuGet package. So for that you go to new project, Visual Studio, class library, NUnit framework. So this is just you're setting up a project, and once the project has set up, you need to get the NUnit package. So you can get it from NuGet package. Also, when I was doing, there were some issues with the latest version, so I kind of used the older version. So you just go to NuGet packages and search for NUnit and install the NUnit framework. So just like I showed before, the annotations used are test fixture and test for test classes and test methods.